All right, well, welcome to the MARY HYTKEN DUMONT University, our winter semester. We remember MARY HYTKEN DUMONT today for blessing, and may her memory and everything about her always be blessing for all of us. We begin on this series of Torah and there's a lot of different things that people have tried to connect with Torah. Torah and science, Torah and derech eretz, Torah and work, Torah and Medina, Torah and state of Israel. And so we're going to talk about Torah and science tonight. Then next week we'll talk about Torah and nature, and then Torah and health, the third Tuesday evening. We welcome everyone, and it's great to have each one of you with us. Our topic for today is Torah and science. Torah and science, as we'll see, has various controversial elements to it. You know, can Torah continue to inspire, continue to be relevant, continue to make sense, continue to be rational in an age of science? This is not a new question. The Rambam had his science, he dealt with it. We'll see that to some degree the Talmud had their beliefs and what they thought was true from an outside perspective, and they had to figure out how to make that work or not work with the Torah. And today that science is developing at breakneck speed, it's a particularly poignant question. Can Torah keep up with science? What's the relationship? The two separate tracks, are they on the same track? Are they colliding, or what? So we're really going to talk about three different areas. Allow me to share my screen with you. So Torah and science. Now, when we say science, the word mada, which is often used for Torah and science, mada also means knowledge. The Rambam's first book in his 14 books is the book of knowledge, or the book of, could be science. At Yeshiva University, when they use the slogan, their motto for Yeshiva University, both Yeshiva and University, is Torah, meaning and, Mada, meaning science. However, it could be knowledge. And that's an interesting point as well. Do we want to simply blend Torah, not necessarily with science per se, all knowledge, any branch of knowledge, Torah and art, Torah and music, or as one novice Hebraicist at Yeshiva University once said, Torah, science, Torah, politics, Torah, art. Okay, that's not how you say it in Hebrew, but you get the idea. Torah, how does Torah work with other disciplines? Tonight we're going to talk about this question from three perspectives. Number one, Torah and technology, or we might say halacha and technology. Technology presents so many different challenges to the halachic system. There are, obviously, it raises questions that have never been raised in that form before. Now, with 5,000 pages of Talmud, with thousands of years of literature and tons of books about every topic, there are a few on religion and science, with all these different writings, surely there's something that has something to do with, let's say, electricity. But electricity itself is new.
My earplugs and I have them in.
That's our first question. The second thing we'll be talking about is Torah and evolution, a very particular scientific problem, and that is that if biology assumes the idea of evolution as the basis of any class taught about biology, talk about from an evolutionary perspective, and Dr. Kolaroff is with us. He once gave a very learned lecture about all the different realms of science that have bought into the idea and shown evolution to be either true or a fact within that realm of science. So how does that work with the Torah story of creation? That is certainly more of a theological problem. First is a technical, halachic, legal question. How does technology affect the law? Second is a more philosophical one. If one thinks that you have to believe Genesis as it was, and then the evolutionary biologists say that you have to believe in evolution or that it's a fact, then do you have a clash, and how do you deal with that? And then the third question about Torah and science, Torah umada, is should science be part of a Torah curriculum? should science be viewed as part of knowledge, and all knowledge is part of Torah? Or no, you have the Haredi curriculum. You have schools in Israel where in certain parts of Brooklyn, where almost no secular studies are taught at all, maybe a smattering of math or English. Even if you say, well, we're modern people, so we're going to go to college. Okay, fine. But when you go to college, when you study social study, when you study psychology, when you study molecular physics, is that part of Torah, or is it separate from your Torah curriculum? You have your secular curriculum and your Torah curriculum. Many schools call it the secular studies and the Judaic studies, as if to say science has got nothing to do with religion, social studies, reading, arithmetic. It's nothing to do with your religious studies, your Torah studies. You have Torah studies, pure, and in the afternoon you have secular studies. Or no, the so-called secular studies are part of a Torah curriculum. So those are our three topics for tonight. So first, Torah and technology, or Halacha, Jewish law and technology. So why is it challenging to deal with technology and Halacha? Well, there are a lot of tools to deal with any question. Again, Torah, or Alman Yisrael, the Jewish people are not bereft. We have an incredible Torah that's very big and very large and can deal with, with so much. It's not a problem of tools. We have tools, but we have no tradition. What's the tradition when we were in 1900 to say there's a tradition? Can you use a light bulb for Shabbos candles, for Havdalah candle, for Hanukkah candles? There's no tradition to this question. You could use all the various methodologies of halacha to you plug it in and you get the answer. No question. But the problem is there's no tradition. That's one of the big challenges. What's new? What are some new things that we have now we didn't have before? A Jewish state, right? So as a Jewish state, how does that work? Are you supposed to, is the state Jewish? Does all of its laws have to be right out of the Shulchan Aruch? How does it work? Never had that before. If secular people, how do they work? Can they be judges? Can they be witnesses? If 60%, 70% of the country can't be witnesses, how do you try a crime? Or how do you do anything? How does it work? Obviously, it's not on this list here, but also women issues, women judges, etc. Rabbi Chaim David Levi suggested that if the Knesset would vote that we think there could be women judges, so then you could say it's true that Talmud may be against women judges, but the country has decided we accept the women judges because the country elected the Knesset. Knesset said we have women judges, so you can have women judges. So the question of women is a new question. There are always women, but the role of women in society, new question. Technology, obviously, we talked about that. And new technologies, how do you deal with it? Secular people, we mentioned. Electricity, what is it? How does it work? Is it forbidden on Shabbos? What's going on? And then there's a more philosophical question that's related to a legal question that straddles between our first and second part of our discussion, conflict of genetics and free will. If we're genetically predisposed to X, Y, and Z, then do we still have free will to fight that? So that's a philosophical question. We're not going to be able to answer all these questions, but just to have a scope of all the types of questions that are new today. Some of them go in the technical halachic realm. Can you light a light bulb on Shabbos? Some going way into the realm of Jewish philosophy. Do you still have free will if you're genetically predisposed to something? Next. Now, many may not be familiar, but a certain time of month when a woman cannot sleep with her husband, and she has to have 7 clean days where she's not having any menstrual blood. However, if she happened to bleed because she went to a gynecologist and he caused a bleed there, so then that's blood from the walls of the walls. It's not from inside the opening of the uterus or anything. So how do we determine what kind of blood it is? So rabbis have all kinds of rules, but the question is, could you look in a lab and say, oh, this blood came from this, or the wall of this, or the wall of that part of the body, could you use a lab to answer a question? Or not? Then we have a problem. We saw in Daf Yomi the other day, the definition of a person who is incapable of speaking and incapable of hearing is that they're totally mentally incompetent. Talmud is aware that there may be individuals who cannot hear, cannot speak. They are mentally competent, but they deem them in general mentally incompetent. What if today you have someone who was born in such a way they can't speak or they can't hear? Well, you train them to speak a little bit. You train them to read lips. You train them to read Braille. And before you know it, they're exhibiting tremendous competence. So do we follow the Talmud that they are, since they're not born to speak and to hear, they're mentally competent or not? What's the status? So this is a conflict between modern views on mental competency and ancient views. It's also a difference between all the strides that have been made in hearing impairments and other impairments. So how do we deal with these questions when we take approach? Then the question of motherhood, right? You have the mother contribute, let's say, Jack and Jill contribute the sperm and the egg, and let's pick another name. Sally is carrying the baby. Sally births the baby. Is the baby the genetic mother, or is the baby the birthing mother? Who ever heard of such a thing? Mother who birthed the baby. Obviously, it's her genetic material. So who's the mother, right? And when does life end? This is a fascinating one, because here again we cross into perhaps a philosophical realm. Perhaps we cross into an area where doctors should have nothing to say about it. That is, most hospitals today, and apparently the state of Tennessee as well, from what I understand in the hospital where I work in Memphis, if they do a brainstem test and there's brainstem death, they're dead. The family can protest all day, you pull the plug out, and there's nothing that can be done about it. That's one palliative nurse said the other day. Now, that means that science has taken a position that brain death is death. Now, you might say that the word death is not a scientific question. Life and death are philosophical questions, religious questions, questions about souls and divine presence and humanity. But nonetheless, biologists deal with what is life, and they've come up with this idea that even though a person is breathing artificially through the machines, if they do not have brainstem activity, they are dead. So do we follow science, or do we follow some other system of breath, etc.? So how do we deal with all this? How do we come to different conclusions? Obviously, again, I'm not going to answer all the questions, but just shows you the scope of, we'll answer some of them, the scope of problems of technology and halacha, Jewish law. So here's one way to frame this question. Does halacha have to change to meet the standards of science, or do we say that halacha is an independent system with its own rules? Rabbi Salvation tried to argue this. The second point, that don't mess with my halacha. The halacha has its own rules. What's chametz? Flour, water, 18 minutes. You want to look at it in a lab and you determine there was no fermentation that went on? I could care less. That's not how the system works. It's an independent system, not based on your laboratory. The Dam Nida. There are rules of when we say it depends. There was something else going on that day that maybe it was blood from a wound. There are other ways of determining it, not by a lab. Or do we say, no, if we can determine a lab, why should we use these medieval or guessing game sort of things? Let's look at a lab, let's determine. Or chametz. Here we mentioned, or bitulas isur. This is a fascinating one. Go to the rabbi. You say, look, Rabbi, I cooked my soup in a fleshik pot, and it was a milchik soup. I say, well, big pot, and a lot of soup. So there's so much soup, it annuls and you haven't used in 24 hours, you haven't used the pot anyway. Don't worry about it, you can still drink the soup. Comes the guy in the laboratory, and he says, wait a second, let me examine this soup, and let me see if there are any particles of, or let's say the rabbi says, no, you just had a little bit of soup, and the pot, it was used in the last 24 hours, throw away the soup. So the scientist says, wait, throw away the soup. Let me do a molecular analysis. You're worried about fleischiks? There's no trace of meat in this soup. Not 1/60th, not 100th, not 1,000. There's no trace at all. So do we say we follow the scientists, or we say, no, we have our rules. We have a system. System is 1/60th, 24 hours, not 24 hours with the pot used in 24 hours. Is it 1/60th? Is it not 1/60th? Don't leave me alone with your science and the facts. I have a system. That's how I decide. Generally, we've been taking this second approach. Leave me alone. I have my own system. I was told I have to look at it more carefully that this rabbi who's causing quite a stir right now, Rabbi Elazar Melamed in Israel, in Har Bracha, in Israel, came out with the Pnei Halacha series that in his series about kashrut, he wanted to say that some of our materials don't absorb anything. Stainless steel, there's nothing absorbed in there. You could cook in there 5 minutes before you cooked your milchik soup, you cook your fleishik soup, you cleaned it nicely. There's not going to be anything absorbed in it because it's stainless steel, and there's nothing that's going to go in it. I don't know exactly what he said about it, but he wants to take the first approach, that somehow there could be substances that are different today than the original substances. Apparently, Rav Shechter was once, again, I have to say this, please double check me, triple check me, talk to Rabbi Shechter himself. But I understand that in general, Rav Shechter had entertained something of the notion of reevaluating certain things, whereas our Salvation was opposed to it because he saw that basically the whole structure would crumble. In other words, we'd have to reevaluate all these laws on the basis of science, and that itself would be an enterprise that would be rather difficult. It's like redoing the Jewish calendar. Let's say we say, wait a second, you say Rosh Chodesh is next Tuesday. Wait, I'm pretending it's, let's say, next Tuesday. Tuesday, speak to an astronomer. He says it's really Wednesday. So in order to redo that, we'd have to get all the Jews to agree that Rosh Chodesh is actually next Wednesday, not next Tuesday, and try to get all the Jews to agree. So a lot of these questions are questions that if you take the second approach, you suddenly have a whole new halacha that's founded in the laboratory and based on those rabbis who take the second approach. And all the people who follow the first approach would say that everything you're doing is treif and usher and forbidden and no good. So these are very difficult. So these are problems of halacha and science. Another question is contradictions between Torah and science. The contradiction. So far, we're not talking about contradictions, right? We might have a different system of determining outcomes, but we're talking about halachic problems, a little different. So Rabbi Yuval Shurlo gave a lecture about this, and he said there are 4 approaches that we could have to how to deal with a conflict such as, let's say, the world was created in 7 days, the world was created in, 13 billion years or whatever it is. So first approach is attack the science. Say that the science is no good. Evolution is a theory. It doesn't make any sense. It's silly. Who took this approach? Or Victor Miller. About Derives said that, it's a mistake. That's not what it looks like. Things look really old, but it's not true. So you question the science. That's approach number 1. Obviously, that's not a modern Orthodox kind of an approach. The whole premise of tonight is that there's something called Torah and Science, that some relationship between the two. The idea that whenever Torah is confronted with some fact, it says, the fact must be wrong. And there's something not rational about that. And as modern Orthodox, we consider ourselves part of the rational tradition, which says that rationality is serious. Rav Tendler once put it like this. He said, the Talmud says you can't have fish and meat. It's dangerous. So you go to your local doctor, you say, Dr. Wiener, Dr. Siegel, is it dangerous to have fish and meat together? It's not in my textbook. Doesn't seem to be a problem. So Rabbi Tendler says, wait a second. Do you take science seriously? Yes, I take it very seriously. What do they say? They never heard of such a thing. Did they study it? No, they never heard of it. Do you take halacha seriously? Yes, I do. All right, so the halacha says it's a problem. If you do a study and you determine that there's no danger of fish and milk, you do a blind study, and there's no danger, we'll eat fish and meat together. Till then, we take both the halacha seriously and the science seriously. So that's the problem. If we take science seriously, then you can't just say, oh, anything that's in science, it's just wrong. Now we'll talk later. You can talk about humility, the idea that science could change its mind. Science could come to different conclusions at a later point. But I don't know that we can necessarily function that way all the time to say, oh, wait another 300 years, science will change its mind. We function that way in general. When I have a heart attack, God forbid, I don't go to the doctor and say, you want to open my chest and move clear my arteries? Let's wait 100 years and then we'll see if you have a better system. We don't take that approach. We deal with science today as it is today. Science says take this aspirin or this Tylenol. I take it today. I don't say, well, maybe they'll change their mind 100 years from now. I deal with the science of the day. So this idea of questioning science is, anybody want to take a stab at that? What's wrong with questioning science? After all, if you take Torah seriously, you say Torah is right, then that must be wrong. So what's the problem? Again, I don't want to get into the question of rereading yet. That's the next question. Rereading Torah. But just in terms of let's question science. What's wrong with that? After all, doesn't science get things wrong sometimes? Anybody want to take a stab at that?
Is it a good checks and balance?
You're just saying that when you have Torah and science, you can get sort of a checks and balance about the truth. Yeah, make sure that you're on the right path. It's true, but it doesn't answer the question. The question is, what's wrong fundamentally with saying, I don't accept everything in science as fact. I'm waiting another 500 years for them to change their mind.
Well, science tries to keep up, but it does change. I mean, we once thought the world was flat, and that the sun revolved around the earth. So it does change. But as far as what's wrong with believing that, waiting and seeing, I think we have to go with what's current. Just like, the rabbis, they at one time thought smoking was good, and we know that now it's not. So things do change.
I don't know if they thought
And we have to go with the best evidence.
Right, Feinstein thought it was somehow permitted, but based on God watches the fools. But yes, now we say it's forbidden. Rabbi Yosef's position. I'm sorry. So what was your essential answer, Ovadia?
Just that I think we have to go with the current.
Why? Yeah.
And then when things change, then we go with whatever the new thing is.
Yeah, I think do we have to say that? Look, like a judge only has what's in front of his eyes. It's a rabbinic expression. A judge only has what's in front of his eyes. You say, as people in this particular century, all we have is what's in front of our eyes. In front of our eyes seems to be they're dinosaurs. In front of our eyes seems to be genetic link between all species. So we have to take that seriously. At the same time, we have to take Torah seriously. Now, there is a second approach to say that we could reread Jewish sources. Again, why would you reread Jewish sources? What do you mean? Let them reread the science sources. So the answer is that, again, Rabbi Tendler's approach, we take science seriously, we take Torah seriously. If you know right in front of your nose that this bone is from 1,000,000 years ago, so that's a fact. I don't want to make a fool out of the Torah by saying, oh, but the Torah says it's only 572 years ago. I have to take both seriously. So if I take the Torah seriously, I may have to reread it in order so that it shouldn't be silly. I have to reread it so that the Torah should fit with that which I see right in front of my nose, in front of my eyes. So there is an approach of rereading. The Rambam said that he believed that the world was creating from nothing. It's a basic Jewish belief. Almost 99.9% of Jewish philosophers always believe that Torah was created from nothing, and the world was created from nothing. It was originally nothing. God created the very first something from which you could have a big bang or anything else. And however, the Rambam said, if you could prove to me that the world was created from something, then I would reread the sources to indicate that, because you can't fly in the face of a fact. The third approach is the approach a lot of us take, and I admit that to some degree, I take this sometimes. Ignore it. Don't have a class about Torah and science, Torah and evolution. Just ignore it. Now, the corollary to this idea of ignoring it, don't teach evolution in school, teach Bereshis, and just ignore the science, or teach both. Get a non-Jewish teacher to teach biology. He'll tell them about evolution. Have a Rebbe never went to college, let him teach Chumash, and never the twain shall meet. And let the kids, they'll not even notice that there's a contradiction. We're Jews, we follow the Chumash teacher, of course we do. Right? The corollary to this, Rabbi Shmuel put it in the same category, one might disagree, to say, oh, there's no problem. We speak totally different languages. We're interested in different questions. Torah is about philosophy, meaning. Science is about question, what? When was it created? How was it created? We could care less. We're not interested in that. We want to know, what do we have to do now that it was created? So it's claiming that we speak in two totally different realms. Problem is that there is an element of ignoring there, because there are certain factual conflicts here. So just to say that, I think Rabbi Shmuel was arguing that to say what Rabbi Sachs is saying, we'll read some of Rabbi Sachs's writings, is an element of ignoring. Dr. Schatz, who spoke at our shul a few years ago, he said, it's funny, if you look at certain Haredi, ultra-Orthodox self-help books, you look at it, you say, this is supposed to be a Torah book written by a rabbi? This is just pop psychology with like some Yiddish expressions in it. So what are they doing? They're using modern social science, and they're claiming there's no conflict at all. I have a journal here where he says, oh, don't worry about it. There's no conflict. Where was that book? There's no conflict at all. He takes various areas of Jewish law and life where there is a conflict, and he says that some rabbi says that it's not a conflict, so therefore it's not a conflict. In other words, because I solved the problem, it's not even a conflict. You just adapt the modern views on things, and then you say, oh, don't worry about it. There's no conflict at all. So that's another approach, is claiming there isn't a conflict when actually you're just adopting modern science and claiming there wasn't a problem. When actually it was a problem. You solved it, but some people don't want to talk about how they actually was a problem they solved. They just want to claim there's no conflict. Or someone argue, I think Rabbi Shuler's argument, don't make science the enemy. It can help you resolve questions. In other words, why are we talking about this as a conflict between science and Torah? Science is your friend. It's a branch of knowledge. So, for instance, going back to the halachic realm, right? The Twin Towers blow up, and there are all these women who were left without husbands. And you say, I'm sorry, can't find your husband, so you're still married to your husband. So what? Yeah, that's the way it works. You have to find the body. There's no body. But they found a piece of DNA. Yeah, but that's not, Talmud doesn't talk about DNA. So Rabbi Reese, and based on all the rabbis he spoke with, they came up with the idea. We can use the DNA. So in that case, science was your friend. It's not there to conflict with the Talmud that you're using it with. Again, there was a problem. Talmud says you have to have some evidence, and the DNA says, what do you mean that's her husband? Here's a little piece of hair, is her husband. And these halachic authorities came up with a solution that we're going to use the DNA as a witness of something. Again, obviously it needs its own lecture exactly how that works. But interesting idea that why are we trying to solve the problem of science and halacha? Science will be your helper. Science will help me figure out how it works. What happened? Okay. Let's talk about the two different realm theory. So again, no one ever says it better then Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs of blessed memory, he says it so beautifully in his book, The Great Partnership, which I know so many of you have read. And here are some citations from that book. He says, what do you mean? Faith is about meaning. Science is a search for an explanation. Religion is a search for meaning. Science investigates. Religion interprets. Religion and science are two hemispheres of the human endeavor. Martin Luther King, human thought. Science takes things apart to see how they work. Religion puts things together, see what they mean. This fundamental difference between atomization, turning everything to an atom of this, that, and integration, looking at the big picture, religiously speaking. Explanation, that's the science, and interpretation, that's the Judaism. Separation, this is this is that, and detachment on the one end, connection and attachment on the other, the spiritual meaning of everything together. It goes deep into who we are and how we do. So these are beautiful ways in which Rabbi Sachs talks about two different tracks. There's the track of the realm of science, the realm of Torah. He has a little dig, just as an aside, I put this somewhere else. He says, if you take evolution for what it is, so one of the principles of evolution is the survival of the fittest. He says, wait a second, why are religions growing so fast? Because no genes have spread more widely than those of Abraham and none more extensively than monotheism. So if religion is wrong, then why is it that the survival of the fittest has had it? That who's having a lot of children today? Orthodox Jews and Muslims, right? And right-wing Christians and Israelis. So we see that even within the evolutionary theory, somehow religion comes out ahead. That's an aside. But back to this idea of two different realms, Rabbi Sachs says beautifully that it could be two different realms. Again, Rabbi Shirlo says, two different realms, you're really ignoring the question. But still, so is it 5,782 years? Or is it, the Torah doesn't talk about that? There's no statement about it. You still have to work out the details about the question. Rabbi Sachs says, wisdom tells us how the world is. Torah tells us how the world ought to be. Wisdom is about nature. Torah is about will, the will of the person, the will of God. It's about human freedom and choice and the way we are called on to behave. Wisdom is about the world that God makes. Torah is about the world God calls on us to make, honoring others as bearers of God's image, exercising, again, this old British spelling, our freedom in such a way as not to rob others of their freedom. So very beautiful. Again, is he sort of trying to dodge the question? I'm not going to talk about the exact answers to all these questions we raised before. Let's just say it's two realms. Rav Sachs, about the great conversation, the question is neither does Darwinism refute religion, nor does religion refute Darwinism. Rather, how does each shed light on the other? What new insights does Darwinism offer religion? Again, that's the idea of it's not the enemy, it's something we can integrate. And what insights does religion offer to God? After the other two? Those are the questions he wants to discuss. Now, if you look at Rabbi Sachs's comments on Genesis 1 versus science, problem of creation in 7 days, 6 days. So Rabbi Sachs says, so Genesis 1, a text that might have been a prelude to science, turns out not to lead in the direction at all. Its frame of reference is moral and spiritual. You think the Torah is going to tell you how the world was created. Actually, it's telling you what you should do with the world, the meaning of the world, who created the world, and things like that. It's interesting to note that both Ramban and Rashi say that the Torah is not here to tell me the order of creation. So that's a well-known medieval assertion that the Torah is not here in Genesis 1 to tell me. Now, he says it was Cicero who formulated the argument from design that we can find God from the fact that things are so well designed. It was the Athenian philosophers who believed that there is a philosophical truth, the existence of God. The Hebrew Bible never thought in these terms. The heavens proclaim the glory of God. When you look in the sky, you say, oh, thank God. You don't ask philosophical questions. They do not prove the existence of God. All that breathes praises its creator. It's not furnished philosophical verification. So he's claiming that we live in two different realms, the East, the West. The West try to make philosophical arguments. We don't. We look up at the sky and we're amazed. Somebody once said, or Salvation once wrote, that you don't look at your mother and you say, no, because you're touching my head and you kiss my cheek, I therefore believe that you're my mother. You just love your mother, right? You don't ask questions about it. So that's the Jewish kind of an approach. It's not one that requires or looks for seeking any philosophical proof of the existence of God. So two different realms, one philosophical, looking for proofs, one just looking at the wonders of God. Okay. Let's look at some rabbis who wrote about the question of evolution. So we have Rav Kook on evolution. My opinion on this is anyone with common sense should know that although there's no necessary truth in all these new theories, so he takes that approach of questioning science a little bit. He says, look, I've been around the block before. I've heard others' theories, string theory, this theory. There are different theories about things. They're not necessarily true. At any rate, we are not in the least obligated to decisively refute and oppose them. You don't have to oppose evolution, because the Torah's primary objective is not to tell us simply facts and events of the past. The Torah's not there to tell us how the world was created. What is most important is the Torah's interior, its inner meaning. Again, here, Rav Kook, the mystic, comes in handy, because he's saying, it's the inner meaning, the great mystical meanings. It's not there to tell me how many days the world was created in. And the message will become greater still in places. So that's Rav Kook's view. Don't view it as, you don't have to have a knee-jerk reaction that if it seems to go against the Torah, the Torah is not really asserting anything about facts altogether. Rav Kook continues, he says, we should not immediately refute any idea that comes in contradiction with the Torah, but rather we should build the palace of Torah above it. We saw the great potential. That, in other words, when you have technology, what do you have? Look at all these books. These are all books written about Halacha and technology. Because you have technology, you have 29 volumes of Torah to answer halachic questions and philosophical questions about science and Torah. Build a palace of Torah on the new science. Doing so, we are exalted by the Torah, and that'll show us the greatness of Torah. And through this exaltation, the ideas are revealed. We'll learn no more about Torah, and thereafter, we're not pursued by anything. We confidently also struggle against it. So, a little bit of Kook is complicated, right? Yeah, we can figure it out within the science, but once we can figure it out, we can work with it. At some point, we might want to struggle against it also. So, and again, I would certainly argue that we do want to fight against the complete idea of just evolution as complete randomness, God not being in the picture whatsoever. That, of course, meaningless universe, that certainly we do want to argue against. I don't mean to imply otherwise. Rav Sachs paraphrases Rabbi Hertz, that's the old Hertz Chumash. It follows there's nothing inherently un-Jewish in the evolutionary concept of the origin and growth of the forms of existence, simple and complex, from the lowest to the highest, provided we acknowledge that each stage is no product of chance, but is an act of divine will, realizing, British spelling, the divine purpose and receiving the seal of divine approval. So as long as it's not pure chance, you can have evolution. It's not a problem. Certainly, the idea from going from simple to complex is justified within Genesis anyway, so he doesn't have a problem with it. That's Rav Hertz. And then Rav Hertz says, well, there are certain things we agree with. There are commonalities between us, 5 commonalities between us and evolutionary theory, things that underlie evolution, which we should agree with. It tells us that God delights in diversity, right? Because we know that there's so many different species. Creator made creation creative. We already knew that man was creative. Now, thanks to Darwin, we know that this applies to nature. He did not make a static universe, a mere machine, endlessly revolving through cycles of birth. Because he made the world to do la'asot. What's the last word in Kiddush? Shebarah Elokim la'asot. He made the world to do. When he made the first frog, he made it to evolve into other frogs. Everything's an evolving being. Every creature is still working on itself. Third, we now know that skip a second. In any event, I'm not sure. Anyway, we know that all life derives from a single source. Remarkable, unexpected fact. Matt Ridley writes about it. 3-letter word of genetic code are the same in every creature. CGA means arginine, and GCG means alanine in fats and beetles and bacteria. Even mean the same in the misleadingly named archibacteria living in boiling temperatures in the sulfur. In sulfur springs thousands of feet beneath the surface of the Atlantic Ocean, or in the microscopic capsules of deviousness called viruses. Wherever you go in the world, whatever animal, plant, bug, or blob, you look at it, if it's alive, we use the same dictionary and know the same code. So these are positive things about evolution that we have a commonality with faith and evolution, what the findings of evolution, that there's a language. This idea of genetics can be exciting. There is a language which communicates this oneness. For science and Genesis now converge in an utterly unexpected way on the metaphor, life is linguistic. And God said, let there be light, and there was. Jewish mystics held that all life was a result of different permutations of the letters of God's name. Sure, it's a metaphor, poetry, not science. But it is nonetheless remarkable that life has a structure no one expected prior to Crick's and Watson's discovery of DNA, hardware and software, the cells and information processing systems. So there are letters in the code of DNA, just like we've always known for centuries and for millennia, that God spoke and there was a world. The letters of God are in all of nature. So too, the DNA letters are in all forms of nature. And fifth, interconnectedness of all life. Rabbi Salvation writes about this later. We'll see. The fact that the plants, the animals, and human beings have a common origin helps us understand in new depth the Bible's phrasing. Let the earth bring forth. The earth brought it forth. The dirt brought it forth. It's a generic name. The generic name for Homo sapiens, namely Adam, means from the earth. Rabbi Salvation took this as one of the central insights of Darwinian biology, echoing the key biblical verse, all flesh is grass. The relationship between flesh and grass, all the animal, the plant, we are all one. That unity, we didn't discover a dualistic world, which there are different types of the blacks and the whites, or who knows what the Chinese and the Asian and the Caucasian. We discovered one world that's united and connected. So there are many ways, as we said, it's not the enemy. It's not the enemy, but it's a friend, and it supports, in some ways, the religious assertions that we make, not the factual ones. We're not really asserting facts, according to Rav Sachs. And now a warning about science. And so there's different articles about science and religion. A warning. Number one, humility. We should have humility about science. In other words, we don't have to have a rejecting attitude toward science. Not necessary. Science is science. When I take my pill, whatever they say, I take the shot, I take the pill, I put my mask on, whatever they tell me to do, I do. But some humility that, all right, look, science says that, but it's not the end of the world. There could be other ideas, other discoveries. There are adjustments to evolution happening all the time. Again, it doesn't mean that it's going to be proven wrong, but just some humility whenever we're making a scientific assertion. Number two, don't impose deadlines on when we must be able to explain this. Because you might say, look, I've thought about it, can't solve this one. All right, give it another few hundred years. That's always someone described orthodoxy is whenever there's a problem, the change, we say, give me a few hundred years, we'll think about it. This is the way orthodoxy deals with things. So you don't need a deadline. Just because, one second, Rabbi Salvation couldn't explain it, doesn't mean we can't, we'll get to it later. Yes, Charlie. Okay. And then there's a famous Yiddish expression, to bleib mit der Kasche. You can remain with a question. The Talmud teaches that. The Talmud often says, the answer to this question is kasha. It's a question. So what's the answer? Kasha. It's a question. When will it be resolved? We're not saying. We have no position on that. It'll be resolved. So, okay. So that's another important point. If you do have questions that you find unresolved between science and religion, remember, sometimes you have to remain, as they say in Yiddish, to bleib mit der Kasche, with the question. And then you have to ask a question when we're comparing religion and science, and I'm trying to put it in my brain and trying to work it out together. Are they on a level playing field? what do I, in the depths of my heart, what do I consider more valid or truthful? What's considered superior out in the marketplace of ideas, in the university, right? In the world, in the Western world in general. What about my own heart, right? Occasionally I'll walk into a patient's room as a chaplain, and they'll say, and the doctor will walk in and he'll tell the doctor, no, go away, I want to talk to the chaplain. For me, the chaplain's the most important thing. Again, that's a very extreme thing. But there are people for whom faith is more important than science. But in general, we have to concede that out there, the world of ideas, it's not a level playing field. I think we as Orthodox, modern Orthodox people, again, Rabbi Tendler's warning, Rabbi Tendler al Shalom, take science seriously, take Torah seriously, both very seriously. Not superior, but for us, they have to be equally serious. And again, that might mean I have to reread one of them because I take them both so seriously. And then we have to ask who's winning. Now, it depends where you go. And you go in many campuses, you think that science is winning. Come to the hospital in Memphis over here and talk to folks here in Memphis, you might discover that religion is winning. There are places in the South where I think one certainly could say religion is winning. I want to stop for a second. I see a question here in the chat. Truly simple. Give me an example when halacha was modified by science and vice versa, when science was modified by the halacha. Interesting. Okay. So an example when halacha was modified by science. Well, we gave an example of the DNA, right? Classically, you have to have witnesses. You have to see the dead body. So that was a modification. Classically, you have to light candles on Friday night. But many people say, oh, you're in the hospital and they don't let you light candles. You could light a light bulb. Again, according to Rabbi, I've heard about Rabbi, maybe the knife, it doesn't absorb non-kosher if it's a stainless steel knife. Where science was modified by halacha, science is modified by halacha. Well, again, to the approach that, put science in the back seat. So they were Babaji Rebbe, like Victor Miller, they would say, you think that there's a dinosaur? It was really from 5,000 years ago. Just the carbon dating is wrong. It's a mistake. Again, I don't usually modify my science because of the halacha. But again, I will modify if the biologist will say to me, it's absolutely random. There's no great design here. Everything's absolutely random. Then I would have to modify science with halacha. I would have to say, no, I will not accept that. I might say that, yes, I understand that the brain controls breathing. And therefore, if there's no brain stem, he doesn't really breathe. The fact that he's breathing with a machine doesn't do anything. And therefore he should be dead based on the brain. But I could still argue that no, science should be modified by the halacha. The halacha is when he finishes breathing, then he's dead. So since he's still breathing, because you artificially have him breathing, therefore he's not dead yet. So that would be a case where halacha modifies the science. Halacha challenges the science and says, no, I don't agree with your definition. I have my own. Okay, back to regularly scheduled. Anybody else has questions, please interrupt or put on. Okay. Precedents. Now, we should remember when we talk about trying to work out science and halacha, or science and Jewish thought, please, we have precedents. There are many early Sephardic scholars, such as, of course, the Rambam most famously, but others, the Ralbag was kind of extreme about it, but other people who followed the Maimonidean tradition of rationalism, they certainly dealt with these questions, even Ezra. And you had Italian scholars in the Renaissance period, the 1600s, 1700s, who were university educated, and they dealt with some of these questions. So there's some precedents where modern Orthodox Jews are not the first people dealing with these questions. Now, you might say, as an Ashkenazic Jew whose ancestors may have been Hasidic or some Haredi person in Lithuania or something, well, What gives me the right to take a tradition that goes back to Spartacus, rationalists, rather than to my own ancestors who may have been more narrow? Yeah, it's a good question. Moving along. And back to this question: is science the enemy or is it my friend? Some people want to say that the tree of knowledge was bad. We don't read it that way. We said the tree of knowledge was phony knowledge. That was subjective knowledge. Real knowledge is great. We're all in favor of it. Read the beginning of Mishlei, Proverbs. It's all about how wonderful Chochmah and wisdom is. Now, then the question is, if something's in our Talmud and it says this is what you should do. If you sneeze, you should do this. If you have a headache, you should do that. Is that the last word on science? So he says there's a Talmudic passage, which today reads kind of quaintly, but in which they were discussing, where does the sun go at night? So they didn't know where the sun went. So first they give their own opinion, and then they cite the Greek view, and they conclude, and their view seems more plausible than ours. And so the Talmud itself says that they decided that the Goyish view was more accurate than their own. So they're not claiming to be the final word on science. So here I am. My approach is somewhat unique to me. What do we make of Talmudic mistakes in science? You can open many pages of the Talmud where they make assertions about science, like we just saw one, that are completely, from our perspective, frankly, wrong. So what do we do? Solution number one, it's a metaphor. You can always say, Talmud didn't mean what it says, it's a metaphor. And certainly in Agadah, in some of the stories, that's very well founded to say that some of the stories should not be taken literally. As the Rambam's son said, anyone who takes Agadah literally is a fool. Anyone who takes them, who doesn't believe it, is an heretic. But there's meaning to Agadah, to stories in Talmud, but it's not necessarily to be taken literally. So you can say it's a metaphor. But sometimes they're giving medical advice, it's not a metaphor. Sometimes they're making assertions about the sun, it's not a metaphor. Number two, we didn't understand what they were saying. You think you understand what it's saying because it says black and white, but really it needs to be reinterpreted. Not that it's a metaphor, you just didn't get what they were saying. They told you that you should take this potion to be cured. They didn't tell you you have to drink it 3 times. For instance, we know how to make blue thread for the tzitzis, but no one told us that you have to put it on the windowsill and have sunlight. Until we realized that we couldn't make it. You have to have other ingredients that are not in the. So maybe sometimes we don't understand the potions that they're using. C and D are my own ideas. When you see a mistake in the Talmud about science, it shows you that you should seek scientific solutions, even if ours are different from theirs. In other words, if the Talmud 1,500 years ago said that this was their top-notch scientists and witches and all the people that in their community who had solutions to a dog bite, let's say, okay? They were out there to figure out what's the solution to a dog bite. I am a Talmudic sage. I'm expected to have wisdom. People come to me when they have a dog bite. They want to know, what do I do? And as a rabbi, I have an opinion about that because I'm a wise man. Think about the stereotype of the Native American wise man. That's what a rabbi is. Sephardic Jews call him the Chacham. He's the wise man. A Chacham is an expression of Chacham HaKolel. Some wise men, they know everything. And the rabbis of the Talmud were supposed to know the answer to everything. How do you interpret a dream? How do you solve a snake bite? What do you do when your babies are dying? All kinds of different questions. And that shows me not that I should follow their advice, but that I should follow their approach. That I am here as a wise person, attempting to be wise, to find out whatever solutions I can to solve problems. Because both we and the rabbis of the Talmud both want to use whatever wisdom is available. And they were even willing to go to some lengths. Perhaps some people were a little bit on the witch side to determine what is true. And finally, it shows that the view of all wisdom is valuable and part of the Talmud. Why does the Talmud discuss snake bites? Why does the Talmud discuss dog bites? Because the Talmud is interested in science and all ideas. Good. Who says similar ideas? The Rambam says sometimes the views of the sages of the world win. Rav Shapira Gaon, over 1,000 years ago, said our rabbis are not doctors. Don't depend on these healings. Don't use the healing from the Talmud. Rambam said about the tooth of a fox. All these, they thought in those times to be evidence prove them. Whatever you think the evidence proves, that's what you should do. Rambam had his ideas in the Middle Ages. You have your ideas in 2021, 22, and they had their ideas in the year 300. Rav Sadia said that I declare first and all that it is well known fact that every statement in the Bible is to be understood in its literal sense, except those that cannot be construed for one of the following four reasons. It may be rejected by the observation of the senses, or the literal sense may be negated by reason. If the literal sense of the text is negated by reason, you're reading it wrong, because we believe in the seriousness of the Bible, seriousness of what is plain in front of my nose. If what's plain in front of my nose says the Bible is wrong, I'm reading the Bible wrong because I take the Bible seriously. Rav Sadia Gaon, first Jewish philosopher, 1,000 years. So he says, when we say that God created the world in 6 days, he says it's really a deep mystery. And it's been outlined in metaphors so the masses can understand it according to their mental capacity. Torah is not there to tell the average person how the world was created. You're a great mystic or something. Maybe you know something about it from Genesis. But for us, it's just a general idea. Going back to some of these questions, maybe this will answer some of your questions. Going back to the questions of technology in Halacha. So what is the law about the deaf and the dumb? Or whatever the modern expression would be for them. But they're learned. So Ram Shik says they were a great rabbi a couple hundred years ago. They're still competent. The Tzanzer Rebbe said, the Rebbe of Tzanz, he said they are competent. Tzanzer Rebbe, Ram Shik says they're still incompetent. We don't use science to change. If you're deaf and dumb, you're incompetent. You don't have to have bar mitzvah. You can eat treif. When we say that an animal is treif, I don't mean the Yiddish expression. I mean the Talmudic expression of treifa means that it has a disease that's so bad it's going to die in a year. Can we add scientific things to that list? So generally, again, if you take the approach, Rabbi Soloveitchik's approach, no. Treifa has a definition in the Talmud. There are 18 things that make it treifa, like a puncture in the lungs. You can't add to it. If you want to add to it, you'd have to redo all of Jewish law. Maybe someday people will, maybe they won't. Maybe it's a separate system, not dependent on modern science. Is electricity fire? Generally, you say if it's a hot piece of metal, it's debatable, but it could be considered fire, but we're still debating that question. Chametz. So he said, so one rabbi pointed out like this, he says, modern science has brought the following paradoxes. If you separate the gluten from the starch, is the gluten chametz, or it has to have both? Motherhood. If you separate the DNA from the birth, is it still a mom? Fatherhood, does it require an act to be a father, or is it just the DNA? Is salt still salt if it doesn't have the chloride, but it just has the sodium? And again, we're not necessarily endorsing sexual surgeries for transgender surgery, but if someone did do that, do they have to wear tefillin? It's a question. I assume they do, but it's an interesting question. Finally, the importance of studying science and wisdom. I know some people have to go to the book club, so I'll just go through that quickly. If Hildesheimer said, in our yeshiva in Germany, we're going to study, we're going to focus on Talmud. Like our Salvation, Rabbi Lichtenstein said, we believe in studying wisdom, but Talmud is primary. And then we will also study other areas, but with the same love which we approach Jewish law. We love knowledge. Is it part of wisdom? There was a student of the Vilna Gaon, kind of controversial, the Kol HaTorah. He does write that there are 7 forms of wisdom, and it includes music, it includes grammar, and syntax, it includes building, it includes healing, it includes biology, It includes measurements and meteorology, and also spirituality. So and he claimed that the Vilna Gaon was conversant in all these areas. They're all part of wisdom, and it behooves us to know all 7 branches of the menorah. Rabbi Lamb, in his book Torah Umada, writes that for tzaddikim, for righteous people, there's no difference between the study of Torah or eating and drink on the other. In other words, your biology class is just as holy because you approach your biology class with great religious fervor. You say, wow, look at this. Look what's inside a cell. Look at the mitochondria. Look at the cell walls. This is incredible. And there's no difference. Rabbi Lamb claims that when you approach wisdom in a greater sense, you find, the beauty of God's endowment to human beings in art. You're inspired by the depths of psychology. You find godliness in governance, right? And you find godliness in quantum mechanics, etc. And finally, he says that you find shleimus. When you have all the wisdom, you have shleimut. Shleimut is the ultimate goal of having wholeness. A chacham hakolel, somebody who knows it all. And then finally, and this is the very last point, there's the idea of science as mandate, not as a nice thing that it's nice to know. It's a mandate, the idea that we're mandated to increase human dignity, and that airplanes increase human dignity. You don't have to walk, and that modern discoveries, you can go to a hospital and get cured. You can have dignity. And this is a mandate. What's the mandate? Fill the earth and subdue it. It's our job to take the earth, everything in it, and use it to increase human dignity. It's a human mandate. Science is not a nice thing to study in addition to one of the branches of wisdom. It's a mandate. Problem is, I don't want to end on that. I want to end on a more cynical note. Is what I described tonight, is that modern orthodoxy? That we believe in Torah and science in practice? Or is it more like Torah and the movies? Torah and basketball? In other words, if you talk to a lot of people at Yeshiva University, I'm not really that excited about science. But I thought that's the motto of modern orthodoxy, is Torah and science. Yeah, but science is going on in the Technion in Israel. They're excited about science. And I never heard anything, great discoveries in science in the undergrad department. And so where's the great interest in science? But I know they're very excited about their basketball team, and they're the undefeated team. So then this writer writes in the Torah Modern Journal, he says, maybe that's not so bad. Maybe there is something to that the idea that modern orthodoxy is Torah, and that you can integrate Torah into whatever it is you're into. You're into basketball? How can we make basketball into Kiddush Hashem? You're into the movies? Make an Orthodox movie. You're into reading novels? Make an Orthodox novel. So maybe there's something to that. And we shouldn't say, well, it's terrible. It's supposed to be Torah Mada. Instead, the modern Orthodox are Torah in movies. Maybe what we're really saying is that being a Torah personality means that it should be broad. Rabbi Lichtenstein taught us it should integrate high culture, not low culture. This article was arguing that you could elevate lower culture, like basketball and movies. You could elevate the arts and other things. So in any event, in some ways, we're arguing not just for science and Torah, but Torah integrated into all of life. As the Hasidic Rebbe said, eat a sandwich or something, you're also in the service of your Creator. So that's my lecture for tonight. And at this point, I'll take any questions or comments.